Hi, and welcome to Progressive Short Takes. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. So, I think that Khanna produced a distraction from the mainstream of from what I think ought to be the mainstream of the debate in Congress. And I think it was an unwelcome distraction. To see what that distraction was, I'm going to share the screen for you and bring up a Twitter thread. And here's the thread. Here's what Khanna said. He said, a simple majority should revise the Byrd Rule from 1985. This is not some hallowed constitutional principle. It was intended to limit reconciliation to deficit reduction by prohibiting extraneous measures, bad economics, allow reconciliation for wage raises and job creation. Now, this may seem constructive, but right now, the most important task is to get rid of the filibuster altogether. So there's no need for the budget reconciliation procedure. So Lana Dell retweeted what Roe said and suggested to me perhaps I should do another short take. And so I replied to Roe and to Lana. I said, it's a distraction, a pre-compromise, a negotiating with ourselves. Get rid of the filibuster, lock, stock, and barrel. Okay, and then I linked to a blog post of mine that I wrote in 2009. And I finished by saying, that said, it might make a good short take about what not to do. And so that is this particular short take. So I left a link so you can go to the Twitter thread yourself. Okay, see it for yourself. I'm now going to share my blog post so you can see that. I think last time I actually failed to share the Twitter thread. Okay, I read it, but I failed to share it. So forgive me for that. But okay, I am going to go through this blog post with you, and you can see this now. And here we are. It's called Drive a Stake Through Its Heart. And there's a picture of Bela Lugosi pointing, Dracula, right? The Republican tax wingnut, Steve Forbes. I don't know if he still is the editor of Forbes magazine, but he was then, or the publisher, okay, Forbes magazine, he was then. Anyway, once said of the IRS, quote, the only thing we can do with this hideous beast is kill it, drive a stake through its heart, bury it, and hope it never rises again to terrorize the American people, unquote. While I don't share this view in relation to the IRS, I do think the sentiment is perfectly crafted to express my feelings about the Senate filibuster. The filibuster is an extra-constitutional travesty that has too often undermined the power of the U.S. Congress to express the will of the people. I recall to you what Roe had to say, pointing out that the Byrd Rule was not some hallowed constitutional principle. Even more, the filibuster is not some hallowed constitutional principle either. It is work to require supermajorities, to continue with the blog post, wherever the United States has to get anything important done. The need for supermajorities, in turn, A, has stopped action favored by a majority in many areas. Where action is possible, it has often watered down or gutted its effectiveness because the need to compromise with minority opponents of legislation has required agreement to loopholes, fine print, quote unquote, and exceptions by the majority. And C, perhaps most important of all, the need for supermajorities has prevented later adjustments by the majority to errors in legislation and to its unanticipated effects, because very often an administration may get only one bite at the apple in each major area of concern. The quote, one bite at the apple, unquote, problem is made much worse by the need for supermajorities. But legislatures can't follow a continuous improvement slash learning based approach to legislating. They need to get it right the first time. But that's a virtual impossibility because politics and economics deal with complex systems. And none of us know enough about such systems to do it right the first time without pure blind luck. The current stimulus package, the coming health care bill, the future energy and environmental legislation, all are sure to be flawed and to require continuous improvement, just as we're finding with the TARP legislation, which was, of course, the legislation that had been passed in 2008, before even 2009. But we won't be able to do that improvement because the lack of a supermajority won't allow it, because if there is a need for improvement, that very fact will ensure that the minority's political interest will impel them toward preventing it, which, of course, is the case right now in our political system, isn't it? How do we handle complex systems and non-legislative environments in order to be successful? The best method we know is to develop a solution to a problem by comparing alternatives and selecting what appears to be the best, to monitor the results closely, and if those don't meet our expectations, then recognizing another problem and go back for a second or third or fourth bite at the apple in order to continuously improve our results until we meet some standard we've had in mind from the beginning. The biggest problem with the need for supermajorities in Congress is that they make legislating a, quote, crapshoot, unquote, because they shut the door on any realistic possibility of proceeding along the path of correcting errors. Instead, supermajorities only allow us to pass an inferior solution to a problem in the first place, and when its results are unsatisfying to everyone, to blame the ins for failing, get the outs in, and give them a chance to try to get their own solutions through the same obstructionist process. Isn't that what happened with the healthcare reform in 2009 and 2010? Isn't that what happened with the stimulus bill in 2009 and 2010? It was apparent after the first 2 months of the stimulus bill it wasn't going to work as it was supposed to work. But Obama could never go back and change it. He didn't have enough political capital because he screwed up the first time. Going on with the post. In the 21st century, a society that can't adapt to error, which is after all the human condition, cannot long survive. And the United States is in for a very sharp decline, I would argue, is experiencing a very sharp decline right now and has been throughout the 21st century, unless we can do something about a legislative process that is incapable of continuously evaluating and improving the results of its previous decisions. That something is getting rid of the filibuster and returning to the constitutional requirement of a simple majority in each house of Congress to pass new legislation. Getting rid of the filibuster is easy to do if we have the will and are willing to abandon the mythology of the desirability of a mobilist government that thwarts the will of the majority. The instrument of doing it is a maneuver that's been given the name of the nuclear option, quote unquote. It was proposed by the Republican Senate in 2005 to overcome Democratic filibusters of presidential judicial nominees intended to block confirmations in the Senate. When Bill Frist, the majority leader of the Senate at the time, got ready to trigger the option, which would have had the consequence of eliminating the rule or precedent underlying the filibuster, a bipartisan so-called Gang of 14, 7 Democratic and 7 Republican senators arrived at a compromise, which got the Republicans what they wanted and saved the filibuster for posterity. The compromise was to avert a vote on the nuclear option, give up the filibuster on some of the nominees, table the consideration of others, and save the filibuster for, quote, extraordinary circumstances, unquote. Of course, what's happened since then is that the Republicans got rid of filibusters to block cabinet appointments, got rid of filibusters to block judicial nominees, even nominees of the Supreme Court, and only saved the filibuster in order to use it to block any legislation that might later be proposed by a new Democratic Congress, which we finally have at this point, and a new Democratic presidency. They deliberately decided not to overcome the filibuster then because they didn't need to block the filibuster because they had the presidency and because they had the Senate. So they didn't need to get rid of the filibuster. They weren't going to use it anyway. But now it's the Democratic Party that needs to get rid of the filibuster. Anyway, going back to the piece, the 2005 conflict wasn't the first time the nuclear option was attempted. It was moved on 10 previous occasions by various people, but each time it was attempted, it was either defeated or a compromise was worked out to save it for future use. The procedure for implementing the nuclear option isn't but difficult. Here are the steps involved to exercise it. During a filibuster, a senator makes a point of order calling for a vote on the measure being considered by the Senate. The presiding officer, the presiding officer of the Senate, most often the Vice President of the United States, makes a parliamentary ruling upholding the point of order and citing the Constitution of the United States rather than previous Senate rules, which uphold the right of unlimited debate as the precedent supporting the ruling. A supporter of the filibuster will then appeal from the chair by asking whether the chair's decision will stand as the judgment to the Senate. An opponent to the filibuster must then move to table the appeal. Since motions to table are not debatable in the Senate immediately votes on the tabling and decides by a simple majority vote. So, the same vote which caused the objection to be voted on with the vice president having to make a decision, the same majority in favor of that is enough to bring a bill to vote and to pass it. In other words, if a majority decides to table the ruling of the chair that the filibuster is unconstitutional, and that majority vote is enough to bring a bill to vote and to pass it, is upheld. By its action in upholding the chair, the Senate will have established a new precedent, namely that filibusters are unconstitutional and that all bills thenceforth may be passed by majority vote, following a point of order calling for a vote. In the last national election in the United States, I said this in 2009, I, like so many others, voted for change in both economic and foreign policy, which means I voted for Democratic candidates for office right down the line. I wanted the Democrats to have their fair shot at fixing the American economy and ending the foreign policy debacles of the Bush administration. I didn't vote for more of the abysmally failed Republican thinking in either of these two areas, since I view any input from them as clueless, reality denying, and sure to result in more people losing their jobs and their dreams. I certainly didn't vote for that political party whose policies have failed to have any serious inputs into the recovery package. Now I ask myself, why are they having serious inputs into the recovery legislation? And that, by the way, this applies now in 2021. Why are they capable of persuading people to limit the overall size of the stimulus? In this case, the survival checks to under $2,000, okay, and to eliminate or reduce funding for any Recovery Act from COVID-19, and for any other bills like education for the disadvantaged, or the Green New Deal, or school improvement, okay, or any of the other things we care about today: forgiveness of student debt, increasing the food stamp program, expanding Social Security. In short, why do they have the continuing influence that I and a majority of Americans voted against them having? Why haven't we been able to get the ins out? The simple answer is the existence of the filibuster. Now, I'm well aware of all the arguments out there defending the filibuster on grounds that it is an important element protecting the minority against the tyranny of the majority in the United States. I don't buy that nonsense at all. None of the other major democracies in the world have anything like the filibuster, and I don't see tyrannies in any of them. Also, the United States has a surfeit of anti-democratic elements in its political system by protecting minorities. We don't need an extra constitutional institution like the filibuster. We have too little democracy in the United States anyway, not too much. And we need to redress the balance if we're to adapt to the challenges that face us. What is the filibuster worth? The filibuster is not worth the job or the life of a single laid-off American. So let's use the nuclear option. Let's use it this week. Let's use it for the sake of the recovery bill. Let's use it for the sake of all the legislation the Biden administration has yet to pass. Let's use it for the sake of all the changes our country will need in this very challenging century. And finally, let's use it to drive a stake through the filibuster's heart and prevent that relic of a simpler and slower moving age from continuing to sap the life-sustaining energy of political innovation out of our republic. So that's what I had to say back then, with a few edited comments thrown in here in order to relate this to the Biden administration. But I think it still applies just as much today. And of course, it applies directly to what Chuck Schumer is contemplating now. Chuck, forget about bipartisanship. Chuck, get rid of the filibuster once and for all. Make the Senate more democratic. Make the Democratic Party more accountable. We need more accountability. We know you don't like accountability, but right now you are accountable. That is, if you don't get rid of the filibuster, we're going to hold you accountable. We certainly are. We're going to blame you for every failure of the Biden administration from that day forward, because every one of them is going to be traceable to the continued existence of the filibuster. So get rid of it or prepare for a primary challenge from Ocasio-Cortez or somebody else. If I were young enough, I'd do the challenge myself. So long, folks. That wasn't as short as I would have liked, but I hope you liked it anyway. Thank you for coming. Bye.